Today, I want to talk about the value of disengaging with your battleship. But before I really get into the meat and potatoes of my theory here, I want to give you an observation, and I'm curious to know whether you would agree with that observation. If you do or don't, you can let me know in the comments section. But the observation is this. As a general rule, if you take the, let's say, average player in World of Warships Legends, they tend, when they engage the enemy, to fight to the death. What I mean by that is whether you're playing a destroyer, a cruiser, or a battleship, when you start the match, you push in toward the enemies, you find one, you fight it until either it is dead or it has sunk you, at which point you return to port, you pick a new ship, and you load into the next game. This seems to be true of destroyers, cruisers, and battleships especially. But at the same time, I think it is the case that more destroyer players and more cruiser players tend to turn around and run away from the enemy when the situation calls for it. In other words, they tend to disengage, reposition, come back for another try. And I wonder if the reason for that is because destroyers and cruisers, generally speaking, are both pretty fast and pretty agile. They go at quick speeds, they turn quickly, they're easier to maneuver. Battleships, on the other hand, are bigger, bulkier, they're slower, they don't turn as well, they're gigantic targets, so maybe it's easier to disengage in cruisers and destroyers than it is to disengage in battleships. And certainly, I would say it is, because, again, battleships are one of the least maneuverable classes in this game, probably next to aircraft carriers, although aircraft carriers never really need to worry about disengaging, because they don't actually engage the enemy with their actual ship, like destroyers, cruisers, or battleships, so this discussion is kind of irrelevant to aircraft carriers, but to surface ships. Battleships, generally speaking, or at least your average battleship player, seems to think in the following way. They find themselves spawned on a particular flank or in the center of the map, and they think, okay, since I've spawned here, I need to play this side or this flank. And what they do is they push in, generally in a straight line. Maybe they make a little bit of an angle or a little bit of a turn, but generally speaking, wherever they spawn from, they sail straight forward. They meet resistance in the form of enemy ships. They stop, and then, if they're being focused too much, maybe they start reversing. Maybe they're turning a little bit as they reverse to try to get some of their guns on target. But they get focused down by HE spam, or maybe because they're reversing slowly, a torpedo boat creeps up on their broadside and dev strikes them with torpedoes. Maybe they get burned down by battleships with good HE, or they get their superstructure chunked to oblivion by battleships with good AP, but they don't survive for very long. They become a damaged pinata, and eventually they sink. And then probably they go to the forums to complain that HE spam is a huge problem and overpowered in this game, or torpedo boats, destroyers that is, are too stealthy, or their torpedoes hit too hard, you have no idea where they are, they're overpowered too. That seems to be the, generally speaking, the strategy for battleship play, as exemplified by the battleships I see out there, and even some content that I see on YouTube. Nobody really talks about the value of disengaging in a battleship. In fact, I've been told a number of times, or I've received hate mail from fellow members of my team when they see me turning around and, I guess, running away from the enemy. I was once told that in this very ship, the Republique, by one of my, let's call them, tactically less nuanced teammates. I think it was some other battleship of some description that proceeded to sit still, bow-tanking the enemies that I ran away from, and sunk, at which point he called me a coward, and my response to him was to send him a screenshot of the leaderboard, which I was at the top of, and ask him exactly what I did that was so bad. In any case, I disengaged, just as I'm doing now. you'll see that I'm being focused by a number of the red ships, and I've been reduced to below half health. And in fact, when I was turning around to disengage, I did take a big AP chunk from either the Conqueror or perhaps the other battleship that's further out there. But that was a calculated risk. I knew I needed to turn around, because if I didn't, I would be in the focus of all these enemies over here in the center of the map, including the destroyers, who I would be in torpedo range of, and I would probably die very, very quickly. So I made the decision to turn around and quite literally run away. Contrast what I'm doing versus what the enemy Conqueror is doing over there 14 kilometers away. He, too, pushed into sort of the center of the map, I guess sort of off-center. He ran into opposition in the form of me and my teammates. He started taking some focus fire, and now he is stopped and he's reversing. He's trying to get back around the island over there to the left of his ship relative from our view, but he's doing it very slowly because he's reversing, and that's allowing me to just sit here and hit him repeatedly with my high explosive, which is excellent. Now, in his defense, he's not really being shot at. Well, I guess he is. He's still being shot at by my teammates. This is just to say that stopping there, reversing and bow tanking is the worst possible way you can disengage in a battleship. I chose to disengage by kiting away. This Conqueror attempted to disengage by bow tanking and reversing. At the end of it, I am the one who is alive, and the Conqueror is about to be sunk, ideally by our fire, but of course that's not always how it works. The Yamato, in fact, yoinks the kill and takes the Conqueror down. But the Conqueror is dead, I'm alive. We're both very comparable ships, too, the Conqueror and I, at least in terms of our armor profiles. We're both coated in 32 millimeters of armor, which means we're both vulnerable to the same kind of AP and the same kind of HE spam. And thus, whether you're playing the Conqueror, the Republique, or literally any battleship, and you're starting to get focused by a number of enemy ships, the absolute worst thing you can do is stop and hope that bow tanking will save you. Bow tanking will not save you from HE spam. It won't save you from fires. It won't save you from destroyers. And it won't save you from the enemy battleships if they recognize that you're bow tanking, switch to HE, or even better, move their battleships to your flank and get access to your broadside, which is very easy to do if you're reversing at 15 kilometers, or 15 knots rather, and the enemy battleship is sailing forward at 27 or 30 knots. Very easy to get around you and get your broadside in that way. So disengaging in a battleship is important, and that's what we honestly spent the majority of this game doing, but at the same time, because we were kiting away, we had all of our guns available to us to shoot the enemies, and we prioritized all the destroyers that were being intermittently spotted in the center of the map, and did a lot of damage to those destroyers, particularly the Khabarovsk. That is useful damage. Anytime you see a destroyer spotted in your battleship, you do need to shoot it, because number one, destroyers are the most influential class of ships in this game. They are often the class that decides the outcome of games. And number two, they're very lucrative for you to shoot at in terms of your XP earnings, credit earnings, all that kind of stuff, because those earnings are based on how many or how much of a percentage of an enemy ship's hit points you remove, not the raw damage aggregate number. So destroyer is very important to shoot at, and disengagement very important because, like in any other class of ship, cruiser or destroyer, the longer you stay alive, the more effective you'll be. The more chances you'll get to shoot at things, the more hits you'll get, and soon, I think actually with this shot here against the Hayate, we'll get the Confederate medal, which I believe you get by doing 20% of a ship's HP in damage to them on 6 enemy ships. Maybe it's 4. I think high caliber is 20% of 4 enemy ships. Confederate is 20% of 6. Could be wrong on that. I'm sure somebody will let me know in the comments. But this is all to say that while we haven't done a huge amount of damage, we were in the center of the map, near the objective, playing the objective, shooting at the destroyers, and when we started getting focused by all of them, we kited away, healed up to more than half health. Again, we were below half health, and only now are we pushing back in to try and help our team clean up the rest of these destroyers. We know that some of them are still in the center. We haven't been spotted yet, so we're trying to be careful in the way we engage. But the ultimate point here is I'm alive to perform this kind of maneuver, and the Conqueror, who sort of made the same mistake I did in overextending, is dead. And that is because of how we chose to disengage from that focus fire. I sailed away and kited. The Conqueror reversed. I think you can see which method is more effective. And this is something I advise all Battleship players to keep in mind while you're out there playing your Battleship. Yes, play your side when you spawn on it, generally, but don't think that your only option for playing that side is to push straight in on the flank where you spawn, or to push straight into the center. Battleships may be slow, they may not be maneuverable, but they have the longest range on their main battery guns relative to the other classes of ships in this game, and they have the most alpha potential on those guns. They can dev strike ships practically all the way across the map. So your goal should be to find a position that's not necessarily straightforward on your flank, but a position where you can not necessarily sit stationary, but hang out while you have a plan to disengage. Maybe you're pointed away south back toward your spawn and you're reversing closer to the enemy, that kind of thing. You want to find a position that you can hold and use your artillery firepower to punish the broadsides of ships pushing in to the objectives. That's what you want to do in a battleship. You don't want to go out there, stop in front of the enemy, and offer yourself up as a damage pinata. That is not the same thing as effectively tanking for your team. That's just essentially offering yourself up as a little bit of a barbecue in sort of the way that the Conqueror did. It's not very effective, and disengaging, while you might not have to do it in every game, some games you can probably play pretty aggressively in, but some games it's better to stay alive and be active throughout the entire course of a battle. The fact that we were, I think, is what lands us at the top of the leaderboard with almost 3,000 base XP, nearly 2,900. So a very good game on our part, I think, and one in which disengaging was absolutely crucial. So something to keep in mind, I think, when you go out there and play Battleships. Hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think in the comments. Consider subscribing if you haven't already done that. And I'll see you next time. Goodbye.